Hi, this is David, and this video is going to be on psychic phenomenon. It's just kind of a big fancy word for the entire group of psychic phenomenon. Now, most of you have heard of extrasensory perception. Some of you have heard about telepathy, maybe even a few out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences. But there's still an array of interesting, just fascinating stuff about being human that we don't really understand, and it's very hard to measure it. The father of parapsychology is Joseph B. Rhine at Duke University. You may have seen his little cards that he invented that have a wiggly line on them and a star on them. I forget, a circle, 4 or 5 other insignias, and then in a card deck. And then he invented, basically, psychic research. Now, he invented bringing it into a modern era where it can be looked at scientifically. Black magic, crystal balls, telepathy, those things have been around since mankind. Worshipping the sun, rain dancing, it goes on and on. But I'm going to try to bring it to some kind of a manageable interest. I'm fascinated by it. I just spent most of my master's level studying a lot of psychic phenomenon. I do have an MS degree from Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and then I've got 28 other postgraduate credits from Springfield College in Massachusetts. And so I've done some research on this, and hopefully I have something that would be of interest to you. Let me start with the overall term. We use it extrasensory perception. What that technically means is that something is happening beyond the 5 senses. We can see, smell, touch, hear. See, smell, touch, hear, and whatever the other one is. I forgot right now, it'll come to me. So when we talk about extrasensory perception, it is above those 5 senses, beyond those 5 senses. It's erratic and it's sporadic. That's why it's so hard to investigate it, so hard to measure it. Now, the scientific method means we need to be able to reproduce it. So if a mother comes in the laboratory and she says, well, gee, I just had this feeling that my baby was tangled in a blanket and about to suffocate, and I jumped out of bed and ran in her room, and sure enough, there she was, all tangled in a blanket, and I saved her life. It was just something that came to me. Well, those are true phenomena, but how do you reproduce that in a laboratory? You sit the baby there for 20 years and the mother there for 20 years, and then the baby hopefully will get tangled again? It's very, very difficult to reproduce it. So that's one of the things that hard science kind of knocks this science way out of the ballpark. Hard science, when you drop a ball and you drop a feather in a vacuum, they fall at the same rate. You can photograph it, you can repeat it over and over and over. It becomes a scientific fact. So trying to overcome the scientific method is nearly impossible in psychic research. So you're taking on a phenomenon, an event that people are going to laugh at you. People are going to say you're a liar. People are going to say I don't believe that. People are going to say you're crazy. It's a field that most of us really like to get into. So let's take a piece by piece, and again I'm going to make this overall. I might make some specific tapes on certain phenomena, but many times there's in psychic research there are feelings. I gave you one example of a mother being able to tell that a child is in danger or peril. Fathers can too, but it's much more common with mothers. And that's something, if you're a mother, you know I'm speaking the truth. That's just something, no one called you, no one sent you a letter, you didn't read, you didn't feel it, you didn't think it. It was some kind of a communication to you outside the 5 senses. Now, there's other phenomena in those areas that are sciences of their own. When you go on the internet, hopefully after you hear a few things that are kind of interesting, you'll find. You've heard of these situations where there's been a car accident and a mother's baby is under a truck or a car. Somehow she musters the strength to pick up 2,000 or 3,000 pounds, and she weighs 100 pounds. How do you explain that? Oh, she has lots of adrenaline? Well, probably she has lots of adrenaline, but there's something there that is outside the five senses. Now, if you try to reproduce that in a scientific lab, you're not going to be able to do it. Her baby has to be under that car at that moment for her body to be able to muster that kind of strength. So there's feelings of males and females that they're receiving communication from either other humans or many will think it's from, deity in some way. And there's a tendency for people that get caught up in psychic research to believe they're special people and that God is speaking to them and God and them have a connection. You see a lot of this in mental illness. A lot of mental ill people, especially schizophrenics, they talk to Jesus every day. So these things intercorrelate and intermingle, and when you're trying to be a serious researcher of the subject, you're just laughed at. You're just laughed at. Well, if you're lucky enough to put some kind of a method together and a hypothesis, and of course you go to the null hypothesis, try to prove what you think is not true, and then you come up with a statistical probability number, p equals 0.05 or better. If it's if it's not 0.05 or better, no scientist in their right mind is going to look at your study, spend any time, or even talk to you. So the standard is that it must be 95% sure that the response that you got in this research project is not coincidence. There's something going on. And of course, if you get 0.01 or 0.001, man, that just opens everybody's eyes, mostly to fraud. Most of the time in scientific method, you don't get out that far. But some legitimate studies have been out that far. So you have feelings, you have tangled with emotions, and that brings us into telepathy. Okay, telepathy is brain to brain, not mouth to ear. Telepathy, many times you'll find with married couples that have been married several years, and if you're married, you can verify this, that you know what your partner is thinking before they say it. And you'll say, oh, I knew you were going to say that. That's a form of telepathy. Now, how do you duplicate it? How do you duplicate it? Well, you can go into the lab and you can line people up and you can give one side, it's what we call a double-blind study, which is the best. You line one side up and they're going to think something, and the other side is behind the wall and they're going to write down what that person is thinking. Well, I've been involved in telepathy studies. I studied emotionally disturbed children and telepathy. My theory was that because they're emotionally disturbed, that they go outside the five senses. They don't pick as much up to live and be successful with five senses. They really need 6 or 7, and one of those is basically telepathy. That they have to be extremely sensitive and cued in to other people to be able to have communication of knowing what's going on and what's expected. And just as a side note, I did get 0.001 as a probability in my study, and it had 10,000 responses, and then it had a confirmation study of another 10,000 responses. Well, here's what you get with psychic research. If you don't know statistics, you might as well not even be able to read it, might not be able to even research it. You better know your statistics real well, and you better know how to smell fraud. This field is full of fraud. Now, I think immediately David Copperfield. I think of musicians or magicians, and the bending of the spoons, and Houdini, and floating and levitation. There's all kinds of cultic fraud intermixed because it can't be measured. It can't be measured. And nobody is going to take it serious, only the people that it happened to. They bear testimony, you know, I saw his body floating. It's one person. Okay, so to do good research, and boy, if you're going to do any kind of research or have fun in doing projects in extrasensory perception, you got to know your statistics, and you got to know how to choose your subjects randomly. That's the first thing a master's level person looks at and says, is the N, what we call the N, the sample, the people that you're going to test, are they random? Now, the first time you show me a study, it says, well, I studied 5 people. It was my brother, my sister, and my uncle, my cousin, and my father. As soon as I see that, I just throw it in the trash. So will your teachers and professors. That's crap. You have to have a large N. Depends on what you're studying. Maybe you can get 50 or 100 if it's a really unusual event, but we like to see it in the thousands. We like to see it in the thousands, and we like to see a computer generate randomness. Take a telephone book, and the computer will randomly choose names in there, and then you test those 10,000 people, and then you do it right, and we watch your controls. Your controls are you whispering around the curtain and telling them what the truth is? And then the numbers will come out and make you look like a genius. It's fraud. It's fraud. We want randomness. We want statistics that back up that randomness, and we want to see how you control that study. And you've heard me use the word already, double blind. We love double blind because the subjects don't know what they're doing and the recipients don't know what they're doing. So there can't be any collusion except the researcher. If the researcher, when this one here is thinking about the number 5 and the researcher goes over to the group and goes like this, that's fraud. They didn't control the study. They're trying to get an extra grant from the government. They're trying to get their document produced in journals. They're trying to keep their job at the university because they've got to publish twice a year. So, there's a little background how difficult psychic research really is. So, telepathy certainly is one of the areas. Let me give you another one that's kind of fun. It's called Psi-trailing, PSI, trailing. Well documented, but can't be reproduced. A couple, a family, lives in California, and they decide to move to Florida, and they can't take the cat. The cat has to stay there. So they move to Florida, leave the cat in California, and the damn cat finds them. Not just in Florida, they find the house, and they find the family. How? I don't know. But we call that Psi-trailing, PSI, that an animal can trail usually people that it's close to and knows. I don't know if it's smell or instinct. I don't know. I haven't studied that, but I have seen the abstracts, and they're correct. There is such a thing as Psi-trailing. Now, if you're into animals, that's kind of a fun area. That's kind of a fun area. Let me tell you something else that I've seen, and this one is old. Baxter was his name, and Cleve Baxter, I think, was his name. And he studied plants. Can plants have emotion? Can they be afraid? Can they be happy? Now, I can't grow anything, but there's some of you that you just go in a room and the plants start growing. Well, maybe here's a little bit of an explanation. Cleve Baxter was a polygraph, a lie detector specialist. And what he did is he had brine fish and other kinds of crude animals, not single cell, but animals that didn't have brains, and plants, and grass, and little trees. And he put a lie detector on these plants. And, I'm just being funny here, but I would say, plant, are you there? But he didn't. He was a real scientist. He wasn't a bullshitter. So he put them in there, and then he would say, and he would take a match, plant, I'm going to burn you. And he'd light that match and move it towards the plant, and the lie detector went crazy. That he could duplicate over and over again. And he definitely proved that somehow there is some kind of understanding or intelligence or fear of man or whoever is going to stomp on you as a plant or burn you as a plant. So I've often laughed to myself and thought, gee, when I go out to mow the lawn, all the little grassers are doing this because they know they're going to get cut in half. So it's interesting. Let me give you another one, Kirlian photography. You may not have heard of this one. This was invented by Russian scientists, and I'm trying to think of her name. I can't think of it right now. But anyway, they took a photographic plate, and they would put it down, and they had a special machine that they invented, and you can buy these. They're available, and you can buy them. And they had the machine underneath the glass, and then they would take a picture of a hand or a plant. They started with plants. They took a picture of a leaf. Well, pictures don't lie. Nowadays, with the computer, you can put anybody's head on anybody. Pictures do lie today. Back in those days, they didn't. And what they found was some kind of a glow that came out of that hand. And it looked like a hand, of course, and it had sparks of light and life. And they looked at that and they go, hey, I can duplicate that. And they could, over and over again. So now what we do, and it hasn't caught on, but it was extremely dependable and accurate back in a few days, a few decades ago, is when you put the hand down on a clean, healthy, good person, you get a certain response. You take the same person, and I mean by the word clean, being undiseased. If they have a cold or they have an ear infection or they're sick, you can put the hand down. It's still perfect. A day or two later, now the aura changes. The body is fighting that infection and the aura changes, so you know when a person is going to be sick. You can see it and predict within a few days that something is going on. We haven't been able to predict what or the exact time or whatever, but we are able to look at Kirlian photography and then say something's going on. You're probably going to be sick here in the next couple of days or a week or whatever. So Kirlian photography certainly correlates with ancient biblical. You see all of these saints that have an aura around their head. And it's white, and it comes out, whatever, 4 or 5 inches, and you see ancient pictures of that, and this correlates with that, and kind of gives substantiation to the Kirlian photography and the aura. Now, there's also another phenomenon that I find very interesting, and Houdini did this. And again, is it magic or is it psychic phenomenon? He was able to walk through groups of people. In fact, he walked through some high-level security areas of Russia many decades ago, and no guard saw him. No guard stopped him. Somehow he was able to block out the ability of people to, he became the invisible man somehow. People didn't see him, and the guards allowed him to pass. So there's those kinds of psychic phenomena. Certainly, you get the edges, you get numerology, numbers predicting your life. You certainly get astrology. Everybody wants to know what your sign is. And when you study astrology, like I did, I go, At first I thought it was, idiots, fools trying to screw me around. I found it wasn't. I found that basically, the planets and the planetary signs that we're born under are too coincidental. Statistically, they just can't be that random. So basically, I have a little belief in astrology. How, when, why, I never studied it that much, but I consider it a alternative form of psychic research. And then, of course, you get crystal balls, and again, I'm just going to use my opinion. I'm not putting a stamp of approval on any of this, but my opinion is anyone, and we've found this. Now, this is a documented piece of information for you. Anyone that has psychic phenomenon, the moment that you pay them, the moment that you have a book signing that they wrote a book, the moment that they start to make money off of their psychic abilities, they appear to lose them. Why? I don't know. I don't know. But I do know, I've seen the studies, and there is a predominant factor that if they try to profit, that they lose that. So I have a lot of suspicion about crystal balls, because, and a seance. Now, I've seen Ouija boards, I've played with Ouija boards, and again, I can't explain it, but sometimes Ouija boards are correct. And sometimes it's scary as hell. I don't know why, but I played with one like once. That was enough for me. I go, I ain't playing with that. And, you know, when it can come up with the vehicle ID number of a car sitting out the front of the house, that makes me nervous. That makes me scared. That's the right word, scared. So you do get charlatans everywhere. You'll get people who have the crystal ball. You'll get some people who are going to read the palm of your hand, and of course how long the lines are and the direction that they go. The person then will predict your life and things that are going to happen to you. In the same way with tarot cards. Tarot cards are the same way, that they'll turn one or two over and say, oh, you're going to die at an old age. Oh, you're going to be rich. Now, here's what basically those charlatans do. They're not going to tell you bad stuff. They're not going to say, oh, you'll be dead tomorrow. Good Lord, make sure the check doesn't bounce. They're not going to tell you negative stuff. And when everything is kind of flowery and positive, as a scientist, I get very suspicious. And so crystal balls and Ouija boards and cards and, you know, those kinds of fringe psychic phenomena are fun, they're interesting, and if you want to pay 10 or 20 bucks or whatever, that doesn't hurt anybody, but it's when you start living your life around a psychic or a card reader, you probably have some emotional problems. You may want to start looking in the DSM-4 revised for mental illness, which one you happen to have. So, in summary, let me tell you how you spot crap. First of all, you look at the reputation and you look at the other research, that the person that is giving this research to you, their reputation. If there's some kind of a person that's got 3 rings in their ears here, and they're gothic, and they got a ring in their nose and a mohawk, and they never had a job, and they don't intend to get a job, they're just going to, you know, read your history with their document. You go, hey, that's crap. Yeah, they don't have to be, you know, old or young, but they got to be reasonable people with no axe to grind. Here's what happens a lot in psychic phenomenon is your mother, your father, your brother dies, and now you're an expert. Now you're an expert on after-death experiences and whatever. So they have to be reputable. They have to know statistics. If you don't have a large sample and you don't have randomness, you've got crap. Don't read it. Throw it away. It's not true. But if you've got a large sample and it's random and the statistic is 0.05 or better, you've got a scientific piece of journal that is going to go in science. Now let me cover 2 more areas that you've heard of. One is called out-of-body experience, and the other one is called a near-death experience. They're different. They're different. Many people who are ignorant believe those 2 things are the same. They're not. A near-death experience is brought on by trauma. You're in a car and you slam into another car and you're dragged to the hospital and you're unconscious and you have a near-death experience where the spirit body, the spirit, whatever your religious and moral stands on religion are, comes out of your physical body. Surgery is a good place for a lot of near-death experiences, and the body comes out, the spirit body comes out and it looks around the room and it can see the physical body and knows who's in the room and some of the things that they were talking about. Near-death experience. It does happen in hospitals a lot. Talk to nurses, talk to doctors. David ain't lying. Near-death is always trauma. Now, it splits off. It splits off from there that some people say that the near-death experience is in the brain. It's a hallucination. How do you test it? Other people on the other branch say, no, it really is the spirit body which was about to die and is close to death in a death situation, and it's waiting whether it's going to come back to the body or go on to heaven or God or whatever you think it's going to go to. So a near-death experience is extremely different because of trauma and usually because of drugs. Many times a near-death experience, the person is full of drugs. You're full of morphine. You're doing CAT scans. You're doing MRIs. The body is being traumatized. So does that mean it doesn't happen? Of course not. But it means the phenomenon is triggered differently. So the research has to be triggered differently. The out-of-body experience is calm. It's not with trauma. And it's recorded clear back as far as the King James Version of the Bible. Paul is quoted as saying, whether in the body or out, I could not tell. That makes me very suspicious that that was an out-of-body experience. And then, of course, Ecclesiastes, I think it's 13, talks about the silver cord. If it gets cut or tangled, then the body will die and go back to dust. Well, in out-of-body experiences, about 20%, maybe 25% of the people who claim, which is 1 in 100, that they've had out-of-body experiences, report a cord, like an umbilical cord, the silver cord, perhaps that Ecclesiastes is talking about, running from the head region of the physical body to the spirit body. And it seems to be elastic and flexible, and people can, visit other relatives in the hereafter and those kinds of things. But they know that if the silver cord is tangled and strangled or cut, they're dead. They're not going back to the physical body. And when it's ready to go back, then the silver cord acts a little bit like a rubber band. The person follows that, and it feels like maybe it is pulling on you to go back into the physical body. Now let me just share with you, because it's my video and I can do this, and I don't have any liability or whatever. I've had out-of-body experiences. Not something I wanted. Scares the hell out of you, and that's a common denominator. If you hear people say, oh, I had an out-of-body experience, it was fun, man. I went and talked to my girlfriend who died 2 months ago. They say that, they're lying. I've never read an out-of-body experience, and I've read thousands, that it wasn't fearful. That's the first common denominator. It happened to me when I was 12, and it continued to happen until I was 19. Never before, never after. Why? I don't know. I don't know. But I do remember that basically I would be asleep. It's always in the REM stages of sleep, usually in the dark, and your spirit body, mine did, came up out of my physical body and hovered in the room, and I could turn and look back and see my physical body sleeping on the bed. That was scary. I thought I was dying. I thought, I was crazy. And for many years after that, I never said anything to anyone because I was afraid they would put me in the white jacket and take me over to the institution. Well, then I got to college and started reading about out-of-body experiences and realized I wasn't alone. That was not a common phenomenon, but it wasn't unheard of. Now, one of the things I discovered with out-of-body experience is sensory deprivation has a lot to do with triggering that spirit body coming out. And McGill University in Canada did experiments with college students, putting them in cardboard boxes or whatever and covering them with cotton, and they couldn't hear or see, and stopped the sensory input, and all of those people reported out-of-body experiences. So it was able to be reproduced at a certain level. Now, a scientist can't see the spirit coming out and going around. It's the individual that says, I was out. Now, some ways that they've tried to prove this, and it hasn't panned out, is that they'll put a number in a hospital room up on a top cabinet where nobody knows the number, and only you could see it if you were way up in the air and looking down. Well, we haven't had a lot of success stories with that particular phenomenon of people coming back with the number and saying, oh, it's number 63. So take that as you may. But the out-of-body experience and the near-death is trauma. The other one is just simply spontaneous. But it does seem to center around sensory deprivation. The other one centers around trauma. So we see these phenomenons in life, and there's others, that we can't measure, we can't reproduce, and so hardcore people, scientists, will say it doesn't exist, only in your mind or in your dreams. I've had a little bit of experience with Charles Tart. I forget, he's teaching now, he was at UCLA, but he was teaching, I think, in Pennsylvania somewhere now, and he's an expert in altered states of consciousness. And he knows a lot about the dream cycle and a lot about when our bodies are sleeping, the brain waves. And we know that there's certain things in infants. We know that brain waves in an infant changes when they turn 8 years old. They're children brain waves until they're 8, and then after 8 they become adult brain waves. How does that affect these things? We don't know. Now, let me just give you a little bit of a spot here, too, on drugs. When I started reading about marijuana, I was a kid of the 60s, but I didn't smoke marijuana in the 60s, and I haven't done illicit or illegal drugs and that kind of stuff. It's just, I don't care if other people do it, but it was just not for me. I experimented once with marijuana, but I didn't inhale. I love that. I didn't have sex with that woman. Well, anyway, I inhaled, and the experience that I had, now it's different with other people. I did get hungry. I'd already eaten. I don't know why I got hungry. And I did feel elated, and the sexual drive was extremely powerful, and sex slowed way, way down. That it seemed like it was days and days and days of a sexual encounter. Now, I push that stuff aside when I do psychic research. If somebody is a drug addict or somebody is a cocaine expert, I'm not going to trust them as much as I would someone who's been clean their whole life. And I tried it once, so I'm not totally clean, but clean enough that I would be legitimate as a scientist. So be careful of drugs. Drugs can have tremendous altered states of consciousness. We also know that if you put babies and humans, even adults I mean, into water tanks and you bring the water up to 98.6, the temperature of a body, and have no sound, you produce sensory deprivation, and you do see some strange behaviors and some reports coming back of out-of-body experiences, and they became intelligent, they didn't have to breathe anymore, they saw a white light at the end of a tunnel. Those things are reported quite often. Sometimes out-of-body people experience seeing relatives or people dressed in white, and that's not consistent. And when it's not consistent, then as scientists we've got to step back and say, why isn't it consistent? If everyone saw their mom and dad, now we could measure it. Now we could measure it. But when they see sporadically and erratically other people, we don't see it. Let me hit a seance, okay? We do know this, and it's documented. Psychic healing seems to be a phenomenon that Kirlian photography can pick up. A psychic who puts their hands on your head and gives you some kind of a healing blessing, the ends of the finger and the spiritual power of that light of the psychic seems to go into the other person and organizes perhaps the immune system and or the defense system, and we do have some results of some positive psychic healing. That's a possibility. We know that can go on. So be cautious. watch your statistics, watch who's giving you the information, look at confirmation studies. If you get somebody that comes up with a flying Jesus every time that they drink a Coke and snort cocaine, you're going to just shake your head and go, this guy's crazy. But if you get people that they've done a little research, and then there's been 19 other people that have done research, and it kind of all goes together. It's random, and the statistics are good. Now you're on to something. Science means you're just on to it. You don't know what it is. Sometimes it's very hard to reproduce. So, there are legitimate psychic phenomena. They're fascinating subjects to investigate, and now that you have the computer, oh my gosh, I had to do all this by hand research in books, but now that you can read abstracts on a computer, you can go through even areas that I haven't brought up in this video. I can't cover all of them, but there's a myriad of them, and there's a myriad of science working on it. Sudden infant death many times has been classified as some type of a psychic experience because there's no explanation and nobody can reproduce it. So be cautious, have some fun. It is interesting science, it is interesting work, and if you're in school, your teachers like to read this stuff, so you'll get an A. You'll get an A, but make sure it's scientific. If you do a study in it, make sure it's random, make sure it's double-blind, and make sure you use the right statistical formula, and make sure you get a .05 or better, or the null hypothesis. That's just as good as the research that gets .05. If you prove that the theory is false, that's a piece of science. Nobody else is going to spend time or money on that. If it's positive, then there'll be other people that read it, and they'll do more, expand your research, and have it go on. So, have fun, enjoy it. It's a fascinating, great area to study, and many of us get into it because we've had some kind of psychic experience. I did because of astral projection, out-of-body experience. That's what put me in it, and I was introduced to all these other fields, and I studied them, and I feel that I'm not crazy. Now, a lot of people disagree with that, especially my ex-wives, and some of my kids. But anyway, have fun with it. Thanks.